Delfi Plus – išskirtinis ir išliekamąją vertę turintis turinys. Praplėskite žinių horizontų su Bloomberg ir The Economist verslo naujienomis lietuviškai. Net 400 naujų turinio vienetų kiekvieną mėnesį, kurios kuria pamėgti autoriai. Edmundas Jakilaitis, Dailius Dargis, Giedrius Drukteinis, Agnė Kulitaitė, Saulius Čaplinskas ir kiti. Pirmieji pamatykite išankstinės tekstų ir video laidų premjeras. Delfi Plus – maža didelių žinių kaina.
Tarptautinis literatūros festivalis Vilniaus lapai. Šiaurė. Lapkričio 11-14 dienomis. Dalyvauja Jonas Hassen Khemiri, Jo Nesbiu, Sofi Oksanen, Marius Ivaškevičius, Rolandas Rastauskas, Fernanda Melchior, Paulina Pukytė, Laima Kota ir kiti. Informacinis partneris Delfi. Rėmėjai.
Hello and welcome to this event. An interview with the Swedish writer Jonas Hassen Khemiri, which opens the literary festival Vilniaus lapai, Vilnius pages. The festival can also translate as Vilnius leaves. And this dual reference to both literature and the season, the late autumn, is probably a very good reminder of how important literature can be when the days grow shorter and darker. A very warm welcome to you, Jonas. How is November there where you are now? Hello, can you hear me?
I hear you perfectly fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So November is warm, actually, strangely warm for me because I'm doing this interview from New York because I'm here. I have a library fellowship called the Cullman Fellowship. So I'm sitting in like a reference room in one of my favorite buildings in the world, this big library on 42nd Street and Fifth Avenue. So I don't know if you hear, there are like actual New York sirens passing by, and I'm here for 9 months to write a new project. And yeah, it's great. I'm here with my family, my wife and our 2 kids. So it's really strange to be here because we were supposed to be going last year, but then because you know everything happened, we couldn't go last year. So for a long time we were kind of unsure whether or not we were going, and then finally we got the visa, and now we are here.
And we're lucky to have you with us tonight. And I'm sure that most people here know that you are one of Sweden's leading literary voices and an internationally acclaimed author of novels and plays and short stories. And you are also a recipient of a number of prestigious awards, and among them August Priset, probably Sweden's most esteemed literary prize given for the book Everything I Don't Remember. And then the prestigious French Medicis Prize was awarded quite recently, yes, for your latest novel, The Family Clause. And your texts are translated into some 30 languages, and some of them have been filmatized. So that's probably a typical introduction. But would you like to add something to this bio if I have forgotten or missed something important?
No, it sounds just about right. Yeah.
Okay, but if I may be allowed to give a little bit more personal, more subjective introduction, since I have been granted this wonderful privilege to interview you today. So I tried to ask myself, what your text meant to me. And the first thing that came into my mind is that it's so absolutely clear that with your texts, we are in the field of literature as art, very fine art. And because you are really a great master of putting the language at work and at play, and you every time surprise your reader with new patterns of arranging your material. And yet, despite this mastery of form and emphasis on language, your texts are never hermetic. There is humor and there's drama and there's always a good story. And you speak about things that are topical today and are time and place specific, but there is also this fundamental universal dimension, because you also speak about what it means a human being, basically. So there's everything in your text one can demand or expect from good literature, but maybe there are other things that you consider to be most important in your work, and what would be your own definition of good literature?
Thank you. This is just, it's such an honor to be able to join in you, even though it's virtually. Next time I hope to be able to be present in person. And thank you for those really kind words. It's a really interesting question. What makes, maybe it's easier for me to answer it if I, as a reader, try to understand it, because there are so many books that I pick up, and I find myself almost knowing what the next sentence will be. I kind of see the structure of the book, or I kind of see if the book is a building, I kind of see the outline of it. And then there are other books that kind of confuse me, but still they give me some kind of jolt of happiness that someone has created this thing. You know what I mean? And sometimes they're really boring. Sometimes they're way too long. Sometimes they're just, sometimes I'm not really sure why I'm intrigued by them, but there's something in them that drives me forward. And coming to text as a reader and as a writer is quite similar. Like what I normally do as a writer, I've been publishing books for, so my first book came 17 years ago, and I've kind of noticed a pattern in how I work. So normally when in the beginning of a process, I spend quite a lot of time working on something that I know is not the thing that I'm supposed to be working on. I'm just, and those periods are quite painstaking, and they can sometimes go on for years, where I produced massive amounts of text, but I just have this feeling that I'm trying to be in control of what I'm doing, or I'm trying to breathe life into something which is not really living, and then all of a sudden I reach, normally this is how it works. Hopefully those periods are becoming shorter and shorter, but normally what happens is all of a sudden I strike upon a sentence that I don't really understand, where there's some kind of mystery, where I just what is that sentence trying to tell me? Like a sentence that has some kind of mystery in it. And then I know that I'm on the right track. And then I can, with this latest book, which is called The Family Clause in English, I wrote on a long project for a long time, and it didn't feel right. All of a sudden I struck upon this sentence, which in English it reads like this. It reads, a grandfather who is a father is back in the country he never left. And in Swedish, I write in Swedish, so in Swedish is, en pappa som är en farfar är tillbaka i landet som han aldrig har lämnat. And there's something weird about that. How can you come back to a country that you've never been away from? There's something weird in it. And then I just found myself writing 20 pages just came about this father. And then I started realizing, actually, he has people around himself. He has a daughter, he has a son. The daughter and the son also have children. They are adult. They're trying to not be him. They're trying not to repeat the mistakes of the previous generation. And then the feeling is almost like, it's quite similar to reading, that you kind of lean into a story and follow it. And that has been my way of working from the beginning, and the kind of the main challenge for me has been to try to be kind to myself when I'm in those long periods of just writing words that I on some level know will not become anything. My wife, when I'm frustrated and like I have a big thing that doesn't feel right or whatever, she has tried to convince me to rename them to be called scales. In English, skalor in Swedish, when you play the piano, you just practice with your fingers. Like there's no melody, there's no mystery, it's not Mozart, but you just do like ba 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 bum, ba 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 ba. And if you do that long enough, sure enough, your fingers will start to create something else. So it's not periods of inactivity. It's just the periods of scaling or practicing the fingers. Yeah.
But what do you do with those variants that you discard? Do you save them?
What I do is
generations, for scholars. I ask as a literary scholar who is also interested in, all possible variants.
What I do physically is actually I move them to, on the computer. I have a special folder called Scales. And I even have an emoji with like small piano symbol, because before that I had that folder was kind of named fucking shit, I hate that this project is not as good. Like what like much more like, and it's easier as a person to think of it at scale. So this is part of the skills. I'm confident that none of that is that's not. The strange thing is like in all of those projects that never amounted to becoming like a book or a play or short story, I always found traces of what then becomes the real story, so to speak. So in the project that I was working on before the family clause appeared, there were a lot of things dealing with families, and if it's possible to kind of to be a part of a family and at the same time feel free. That was a thing that kept coming back again and again, because like in families we kind of linked through love and respect, and like we take care of each other because we're family. But at the same time, I was really intrigued by the question of if it's possible to be part of a family and at the same time feel like you could be free. And that's very clearly a part of this, the family clause, because we meet three people. This, like I think of them as the sister, the son, and the father, we could call them. And these three people, they really love each other. They have a past. They take care of each other, but at the same time, they try to break free from each other. So in the book, the father, he is old, he lives abroad, he comes back to Sweden twice per year because he needs help. Like he is losing his eyesight, he has diabetes, he's a very isolated, lonely man. And he's depending on his now adult kids to help him. And the whole book takes place during one of those visits. So he is in Sweden for 10 days where he needs help with everything. And the big thing is that his kids don't want to help him anymore. Or rather, they kind of start questioning if helping him is the best way for him. Is it the best way to help him, or is there so they want to renegotiate the family structure. They want to change things. And then the moment they say that, a lot of things happen in the family, and a lot of kind of painful things from the past appear. So, and those were things that were in the previous, the scale project, like those issues were there, but they hadn't found the right form. And in this book, it felt it just felt like it came to life.
Since you have started already speaking about your latest novel, maybe we can continue with that. Would you call it your most personal novel? Is it your own family history behind?
Yeah, I think this is the most personal book I've written. And why is that? Did you notice that this is my most personal? And then it was as if I put my hand up, almost like to defend myself. I think it's the most personal. Like with every book, I've found that I have some kind of thing that I was kind of afraid of, that I wanted to do in the book, that I had a hard time doing in my own life. So, for example, in the first book, called Ett öga rött in Swedish, one I read, there were a lot of I played around a lot with language, a lot of grammatical errors. It deals with a boy who tries to destroy the Swedish language through the use of language. And I grew up in a home where people were really, like my father was a language teacher. He drove the subway and he was a language teacher, but like I grew up in a home where grammar was really important to respect. So then I wrote my first book, kind of, like destroying language or breaking down language and trying. And that for every book, I see that repetition. Like there's something I'm afraid of, and then it pops up in the book. And when writing this book, I think that the kind of the most personal aspect of it was that I was on paternal leave with my kids, and I thought a lot about what my parents had done right and what I would like to change. It's almost like I made a list of like the good things they gave me, like they gave me all these amazing things, but then there were other things that I didn't want to give to my kids, that kind of thing. So I kept thinking of like, how is it possible to break those, almost like a family curse? Is it possible to break free from what your past has given you? And when I was writing the book, I think it started off almost like this idea that I wanted to write the son's version of this specific family's past. I almost saw it like, now it's my time to give my statement, But then as I was writing it, strange thing, that's also that shows the power of literature. Like the more I wrote about the father, who is so isolated, who is so lonely, who is so kind of, how should I put it? Like he's like his body is heavy, really heavy, with the guilt of having left someone who is not alive anymore. So we know in the book that the father has had a daughter in a previous relationship who he has left. He has abandoned her, and she's not living any longer. And as I was writing the father, I'm, almost involuntarily started understanding him, started understanding his quirks, and started understanding his, the pains. And a little bit similar when I was writing the sister. I kind of, so in the end, something that starts off as being, having an idea that you want to do one thing as you're writing it, it's almost like the work of fiction transforms you into, it sounds super moralistic, but like transform you into a better person, because kind of the demands of fiction forces you, if you're going to write well, you have to be nuanced. You have to make these characters come alive, and then almost then you tend to understand them more and more. So in the book, we follow these 3 characters during 10 days, and then we get to know them better and better. And the one thing I knew was that in the middle of the book, the dead sister would reappear. And that's exactly what happens in the middle of the book.
Yes, there's some flavor of magic realism suddenly in your very realistic novel. And
Yeah. I don't know why she was so forgiving. That's also a thing that I'm not sure. Like, I knew that she would pop up because I know that, like, all the dead people I know, they're with me. It's not like they come walking down Fifth Avenue every day, but they're with me, and I hear them and I can see them from time to time because your brain keeps them alive, you know what I mean? And you keep seeing people who look like them and that kind of thing. And I knew that this dead sister would come back. But I thought she would enter the book and tear it apart. You know, I thought she would enter it and be like, why did you leave me? Like, being angry. But the weird thing is that she enters, and she, of course, she doesn't have a body because she's dead, but she has a really surprising ability to forgive the father. She's actually the only person in the book who seems to actually care for him. You know, who takes care of him and who actually helps him up from a subway train track when he's down. So even though she doesn't have a body, she's there for him, which sounds quite paradoxical that the one person who doesn't have a body can be physically present. But that's also what it feels like. If you lose someone, that's in my experience, that has been my experience. Whenever I lose someone, kind of the fact that they are not here can make them weirdly present. And I think something similar is happening in the book.
Yeah, there is a similar episode in your play, I Call My Brothers, where it's a telephone call with a dead grandma.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I think that's something that keeps coming up in your writing, because it's something, you know, like the things, it's impossible to disguise yourself. When you say that this is my most personal book, I've always felt that whatever I'm working on, I feel like this is my most personal one, because that's kind of, you know, whatever you're interested in keeps popping up in the book. I don't know if you hear, there seems to be some kind of like a bagpipe festival on Fifth Avenue. Do you hear this? No?
No, not really.
Okay, great. It's just like a parade of bagpipes walking past. Yeah, I don't know what it is. Oh yeah, it's like a holiday here today. That's why. So it might be bagpipe day.
But it's still morning, yes?
It's still, yeah, it's 11:24. Yeah. So what I've been doing, like, sort of, to be really blunt about it, like when I a few years ago, I lost a friend of mine died. And as painful as that was, and as full of guilt that, you know, I was full of, and every time we lose someone, like, it's, especially if we lose someone young, it's very easy for the people who are left to feel guilt. And my immediate impulse after she passed away was to write a text about her. I wrote like a short text about her that I read at her funeral. And I keep thinking of that, what that was, you know. It actually, like, the impulse, you lose someone, and then straight away I go, like, almost like a few days later, I start taking what I remember from her and I put her back and try to make her eternal in some ways in the text. You know, in reality, that text captured, you know, it was not like she was a full human being. It's impossible to capture one person in a one-page text, but that impulse is something that I have been doing all my life. When someone disappears, I take them and I make them come alive and stay forever in text form, kind of. And that keeps coming back in all my writing. And exactly as you say, I Call My Brothers, and in the first book, the mother is dead. In the second book, a father has gone missing, and the son tries to recreate him with the use of his words. I think it's one of those big questions that I don't know the answer to. Is it possible to recreate someone with words? I don't think so. Is it? Do I have a better alternative? No. So maybe that's just the way I deal with loss, or the way I deal with death.
And this relation between, I don't know, the memory and language, the limits of language and the possibilities of language is very central to your novel, Everything I Don't Remember.
Yeah.
But I was wondering about this title, because usually you say everything, that's all I remember, or I don't remember anything, but now it's Everything I Don't Remember, and it's very alarming, because it's something very, very big, and at the same time also something concrete, much more concrete than anything. So what would be your explanation for the title?
Yeah, I kept thinking about that. How we when we tell stories, we choose to omit certain aspects of what happened. So in Everything I Don't Remember, which was the book that I published before this book, The Family Clause, it's very much about someone who has passed away. That was the book that I wrote exactly just after my friend passed away, actually. So I kept thinking of like what do I do with all these memories of her? Like what do I do with them? Do I and there were specifically like memories where I had been alone with her. Like those memories became extra fragile, because it was only her and I who had experienced them, and now she was gone, so I was the only person who had them. So I kept thinking about that, like how certain memories can become really important if one person dies. And then also I kept watching how my own mind worked when it tried to kind of get out of guilt, if you know what I mean. Like how my own mind tried to construct a story saying, well, actually, it was that person's fault, or actually it was because that's what we do. We are story making animals, and we tend to create stories that are comfortable for us to bear, to be with, if that makes sense. And no one wants to have a story where you're the ultimate bad guy, So I think that's why in Everything I Don't Remember, what happens is that it's a book that only consists of voices. And it's only the voices of the people who knew that person who passed away. And these voices are kind of colliding. So sometimes they seem to remember one person, and sometimes they seem to remember a situation completely differently. And what happens like in those situations, like, if two people are at the same party and they remember it completely differently, well, the way that they tell, the way that they choose to omit certain things tells us a lot about who they are. So I think that's where the title came from. That it's not only what you tell, it's actually also what you choose to omit out of your story. What you choose to silence, or what you choose to ultimately, in the long run, forget.
And basically, we never find out who that Samuel really was, or what really happened to him, and that's probably exactly the point, that we should somehow learn to live with that.
Yeah, we don't get a 3-line answer saying, so this is what really happened. But what we do get, I think, if the book succeeds, it gives us a feeling of who he was through the form of the book. Because Samuel, who is the main character in that book, he is a lover of speed. He is so freaking impatient. Like he can't sit still. He's always on the move. He needs something new fast, you know. So the book consists of all these different voices in short, different kind of sections that I think tells the story of who he was through the forum. Kind of to put it bluntly, I think he would have liked that book. You know what I mean? Because it just kept moving fast. And ultimately, one of the things that killed him in the book is that you know, is speed. Like he drives his grandmother's car into a tree in a really high speed. And the main question is, like, does he do this on purpose or not? Yeah.
Yes, but there's also this interesting saying that he has, that you have to think about your experience bank, and he is always busy with somehow collecting
true, yeah.
that could be remembered.
Yeah.
So
he has this thing. It was just a word that me and my friends played around with, but like in Swedish it's called erfarenhetsbanken, like the bank of experiences. Kind of. It was when I was young, that was a thing that we kind of used it to do things when we were, I think maybe when we lacked courage. Do you know, like, should we go to this really weird like techno party in Uppsala? Okay, we have to take the train and we have to go there. Is it worth it? Oh, it's probably going to be terrible, but you know, erfarenhetsbanken, you know, whatever happens, we will remember it. You know, we would go on this train. We would probably not come back until 3 days later. But so like, it was a way also in like social settings, you know, should I go up and speak to that girl? Oh, no, yeah, of course, erfarenhetsbanken. Like you, at least if you get shut down, you will remember it. Kind of. So it was a way for him. It was a way for us to participate more in life. And Samuel uses it a little bit the same. Like it's his way of trying to kind of, you know, we all walk around in our bubbles, and it's very easy to kind of, especially like in these strange times, like to fortify the walls of those bubbles, if that makes sense. And then there are certain things that we can do to kind of penetrate the wall and get out and create a connection with the outside world. And for him, it was erfarenhetsbanken. You know, it was that thing that he used to come out. For me personally, I think writing has been that thing. You know, like that has been the I don't know why I keep, you know, putting a stick through the bubble, but you know what I mean. Like words and writing. Both as on a personal note, like as a writer, but also, you know, to spend kind of, I spent the whole like COVID lockdown, or like the Swedish version of lockdown, reading Tolstoy, reading War and Peace. I'd never read that before. And it was one of those, like, I kept saying to my wife, like, I think this book is saving my life right now. Because it was such a strong feeling of having these characters and having that kind of, especially being, you know, during a year when nothing happened and everything was closed down, and a feeling of like life, just the bubble becoming like really thick, the walls. And then having that book as a companion was really, really helpful. And something similar is happening when I'm writing as well. That I have the feeling that to have an alternative world present, strangely enough, makes it much easier for me to be present, you know, with my friends and family. If I have this alternative world here, then it's easy for me to break the feeling of isolation.
I'm sure a lot of people were happy to have your books during the pandemic, during the time they had to spend. And I also wonder, how is it possible that you make such very often daily life experience into funny stories? And I'm thinking, you know, about this everyday life of a young dad sitting at home with 2 kids. So probably for listeners from other countries than Sweden, than Scandinavia, where the gender roles are probably more traditional. It's quite an interesting read, and but maybe also in Sweden you are the first who has brought these things into literature.
Well, actually, that I think I must pay tribute to Karl-Ove Knausgård, for example, who I remember, like, I remember reading him when I was on paternal leave, just realizing, like, wow, how is it possible that he puts so much drama into these things that were just like, I remember him writing about clouds, and all of a sudden I started looking at the sky and was just like, those clouds, they were up there all. They have been there all along, but it wasn't until he wrote about them that I started seeing them, if that makes sense. I just got a kick out of, when I was on paternal leave, I had this idea that I would be the perfect father, and I would just like be 100%. Because one of the things that I kept saying that was important for me as a father was that I didn't want to leave my kids. I wanted to be present with them. But if you have that mantra in your head, I have to be present, I have to be present, I have to be present, it's actually really hard to be present. And it's also really hard because you're not allowing yourself to feel all those perfectly normal emotions that you have as a parent. I love these small crazy persons to death, but sometimes as a parent, you have this impulse that you want to leave, you want to sit on the couch, read Tolstoy, and that's also part of being a parent. But what I found was that everything that was not being like 100% present, like those thoughts became a little bit like forbidden for me. So I thought, oh, this is interesting. Like, thoughts that are forbidden is good to write about. So what I did was I just like started writing down like what happens when you're with like two very young children who are not sleeping ever, like they're never sleeping. What happens to the brain of a person who's trying to be the perfect parent, who hasn't slept since like October 77, like a very long time ago? What happens to that person's mentality if he or she also doesn't allow herself to vent the frustration? So I think that's the key to those episodes. In the story, it's a father who's trying to be the best father and trying to be the best friend, trying to be present, and ultimately, we see that something that just looks kind of boring and routine, changing the diapers. If you tweak the lens and zoom in, it can actually become really dramatic. And there's a lot of, like, I think of those chapters almost like, action movies, like miniature Die Hard movies set in, at the diaper table kind of, because, and it's all, and of course, like everything deals with his mentality. It's not that being alone with two kids is difficult. Like, especially women have been doing that for, since the beginning of time. Like, it's not that, I'm not saying that it's difficult in that aspect, but it says something about who he is when all of these practical matters kind of, almost kill him, because he's trying to do them in a way that is different from the previous generation. And ultimately, that is also why this person who keeps telling himself, I will never leave my kids, actually leaves his kids. Or that is one thing that happens during these 10 days in the book, that the son disappears and the father, who has not been there for his kids, has a chance to repair the past through taking care of the grandkids. That was also something.
Wonderful episode, the night that he spends with his grandchildren, and also the next day in the morning when they go sledging.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe
that's the only kind of tool we have to turn time inside out. Maybe that's the kind of because he is so in so much pain for things that he has done in the past, and he will never be able to go back and change them. So what can he do? Like, there's no time machine. He can't say he's sorry because his daughter doesn't live anymore. So what can he do? Well, for one night, he can take care of his grandkids. And during that night, he's okay. He serves some popcorn as breakfast, and he's just like, he's doing his best. He has no idea what he's doing, but he's trying really hard to be the dad he never was, And then after a few hours, he's just like, I gotta go. I got places to be, people to meet, he has better things to do. But maybe something healed during that night. I think at least he understood his son better.
And the son probably also understood him better. There's some hope for reunion at the end of it, at least. Yeah,
I think, so maybe they understand each other like 3% more. Maybe that's all that happens, but that's something. To understand something 3% more is not bad. It's like, I've spent a lot of my days in my life not understanding people 3% more, and if you understand someone 3% more every year, there might be some happiness at the end of the tunnel. Okay?
I have so many questions that I would like to ask you, but I also see that the time is running out. But maybe before we finish, could we speak a little bit about the role of place in your work? There is so much Stockholm, there is so much Sweden in your work. There is also Tunisia, there is also Berlin, and now you are in New York. Do you feel some kind of spirit of the place? Can we expect a New York novel in the future?
Well, actually, I'm here to work on a project that has a link to New York. Yeah. So, and that project is just like growing and growing and growing. So that maybe that's, you catch me on a very happy day today, because it feels like that problem. There's a link between that project and the place that that's why I'm here. So to write that project. I don't know, like this, on like a kind of personal note, like I've been, when I was a kid, like I loved going to libraries. That was the place where I felt most comfortable. And my mom and I used to go to a library in Stockholm called Untitled Bibliotek, which was just like, we would bring like IKEA bags and just like stock up on books. And it was, and then 10 years ago, when I had just met my wife, we were walking down Fifth Avenue just out here, and it was raining. And I told her, like, there's this fellowship in this big building, behind these the lion statues. There's a fellowship where you can get like funding to work on a project inside this library. You get your own office, and I told her, like, one day I'm going to have that scholarship, and so it's kind of a weird circle in time to be back here 10 years later now with her and with our two kids. So it's right now it feels, thanks to this project that I'm working on, that this is really the place where I'm supposed to be.
That's great. It was great talking to you. Would you like to say one sentence to our audience?
No, but it's been such a great honor to be able to do this online, and hopefully next time I will be able to be there in person.
Yes, we're very much looking forward to that, and thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Have a nice day.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Sveiki, gerbėmieji, šiandien man yra didelė garbė ir malonumas pristatyti literatūros festivaliui Vilniaus lapai vieną iš garsiausių norvegų rašytojų UNESCO. Ir tai nebus toksai pradinis pristatymas, kadangi labai daug lietuvių skaitytojų jau yra skaitę jo knygas ir nuo 1997 metų gali skaityti jo vertimus. Pokalbis vyks angliškai, dabar mes perėsime prie anglų kalbos. So, dear you, am I pronouncing it right? It's different.
Well, you know, my father grew up in America. He always called me Joe. In Norway, I'm referred to as you. Anything goes.
Okay, right. So I am very happy to present to you, or rather to present you to your a bit small but really very faithful Lithuanian readers audience, because Lithuanian readers have been reading your books since 1997 when the first one was translated. It was The Bat, the crime story about Harry Hole. But we'll get back to these Harry Hole stories a bit later. Now I would like to ask you about your latest book, which is a collection of short stories, The Jealousy Man and Other Stories, right? Mm. It's not yet translated into Lithuanian, but I just bought it translated into Russian. I guess you've seen it in Russian, yes. And it says on the cover that there are 50 million of your books sold worldwide, which is awesome. Talking about short stories, basically, this is the normal question. You've been writing novels before that. Why short stories? What are the advantages of short stories? Why did you switch to this genre?
Well, I think I probably started out writing short stories, not to have them published, but just for my own amusement, and maybe print in the school paper or something like that. So my first attempt at writing stories were definitely short stories, and I also, unknown to most my readers, I actually published a collection of short stories in the year of 2000. It wasn't translated, but it was a collection of short stories, non-crime stories. So it's always been, you know, a natural thing for me to write stories of, you know, 3, 4, maybe 10 pages. In this collection, there are also a novella. So it's sort of some really short stories and some long short stories. I guess one long short story. To me, the length of the story is not the point. I see myself as basically as a storyteller. Whether it's when I'm writing novels, short stories, lyrics for my band, or even music, I see as storytelling, and whether it's children's books or crime fiction, it doesn't really matter. It's all about, you know, using the format to tell a story.
Yes, but these are a little bit different short stories. For example, well, I haven't read them all, but I have read the longest, the novella one. And I have this impression that they are based on very, very strong emotions. So they are basically stories of very strong emotions. And perhaps the strongest of them is frustration of something done incorrectly, of something done wrongly, of something being done around you, which is wrong, and something like that. Was this the idea of depicting more or less emotional states and emotional actions of people that attract you to the short stories? Because in the novels, it's more actions, it's themselves that move the plot.
I think that you're right, that most of the ideas for these short stories are based on internal conflict, not so much external conflict, which is, of course, the classic case in the crime novel, that a murder has been committed and order must be restored in society, sort of. Here it is more on the personal level. That is, like you said, some frustration, jealousy, or other strong emotions that will have to be balanced, and the person, the human being, has to restore order within himself or herself, and then that will create conflict also. So I guess all storytelling is about conflicts. It's just here there are different kinds of conflicts, but jealousy is definitely a driving force in these stories, and I've been returning to that motive not only in these short stories but in my novels also. It's a sort of a mysterious feeling, because it's the kind of emotion that I guess if we were to name one emotion that we would like to get rid of, it's probably two things. It's blushing, and it's blushing and jealousy, I think.
Because they are most personal, or they betray something of a person.
Yeah, well, I think maybe it's a feeling of losing control. That is, I think that anger and love, we feel that we to a certain degree can control. And I think that is the frustration of losing control, that we are showing emotion and we are having these emotions. In jealousy, you can of course hide your jealousy, but alone with yourself, it's a painful feeling to struggle with, and you're trying your best, to get rid of it, but you really can't. I mean, when it comes to anger, you can sort of reason with yourself. You can talk yourself out of being angry. You can't talk yourself out of being jealous.
And speaking of being in control or being out of control, now I come back to your most popular hero, Harry Hole, yes? Because, so he's a very interesting person, also of very intense feeling, of very complicated character, and also a person with a very dark side to him, which is his alcoholism, which keeps him on the permanent, I don't know, he's never truly himself. He can't be in control of his own life. Was it your idea to create a character like that, and then to make this character your main character, and through him to express your ideas about the conflicts with the world, about the crime stories, about fighting crime, and so on? So, did you, from the very first, foresaw him to be such a complicated and dark person?
I think that he has definitely developed over the series. I mean, when I wrote the first novel about Harry, I had no idea it was going to get published. It was my first attempt at writing a novel, and it was my first time that I sent it to a publishing house. So I wasn't prepared for the popularity, but more important, I wasn't prepared that I was going to write 12 stories about this guy. So I think that, but when I started out, I knew I wanted a character of contradictions, that he was to be, like you said, that he's not in control. Well, that's true, of course, when it comes to a point he loses control. But up to that point, he is the only way he can survive is by having this strict control. It's like when I describe his apartment, that everything is tidy and in place and everything is in alphabetic order. It is, of course, that because he knows that if he's not in control, he's totally out of control. There is no middle way. There is no middle ground. It's catastrophe or full control. So that reflects his personality also, that he has this, on one hand, he's this analytic, almost cold-hearted, cynical character. On the other hand, he is the most romantic and soft-hearted character and sentimental, that will, although he thinks that his actions are based on logic thinking and of ethical principles, while in fact they're based on emotions, and most of his actions are very spontaneous. But like most of us, we will then explain our actions in hindsight, using any sort of rational that we can find, and so in that respect, Harry is like most of us, I think.
Is he obsessed by the sense of justice being done? Is it the main reason that moves him to fight crime, so to say?
I think there too you have this contradiction in his character, because on one hand, he's an outsider. He doesn't feel that he belongs anywhere really, and and to a certain extent he probably feels more related to the criminals he are chasing than his colleagues at the police house, because he can sort of understand that outsider role, being outside looking in. On the other hand, he has the same social reflexes that most of us have, that if you are good at something that can contribute to the herd, you will do that. It's almost like you can't stop yourself. So he is good at chasing murderers, and so he's almost involuntarily, he will do a very good job, and he is driven in his job because he knows he's good at it. And although he knows that solving a crime will always lead to some sort of anti-climax, that is what he's struggling for, to solve the case, to make life in general have some meaning. I guess that's what he's looking for. He's looking for answers, not to who did it. Well, that too, of course, but he has this hope that he will find something else. There's something else that he's looking for that he can't put his finger on. So I guess that is what makes him you could say complex character. I would call him more a real life character, that he is as complicated and contradictory as most of us are.
Do you know some people in real life who would be like Harry?
Well, I did partly base him on a couple of real life models, but also some characters from fiction. So yes, there are some people I know pretty well that may be some sort of model for Harry.
And there is another thing about the books about Harry, is that these are quite violent books. There is lots of cruelty and violence, and just violence. Do you need this to express the intensity of the situation, of the intensity of the conflict, or has it some other purpose?
Well, I think that it has the purpose of making clear what's at stake, what Harry is up against. You may have, of course, pure cruelty that isn't necessarily describing a character. The point may not be describing some very evil character, because sometimes if a character is evil enough, they will stop coming across as real characters. They will be like the shark in Jaws, which is, of course, not how a shark will act, but it's a representation, a metaphor for what we fear. And so you have that sort of character that isn't the character, but it's just a metaphor for evil, for antisocial activity, and what we need to save our society from. On the other hand, you have also the sort of evil that is not extreme, but that is maybe violent and is caused by anger and a feeling of injustice, seen from the point of view of the criminal. So and also you have a certain level of violence which is part of the tradition of the crime story, which is part of the genre, and I respect that. I mean, of course I can write a crime story without even a trace of violence in it, but there is a sort of fairy tale quality to the traditional crime novel that involves crime or involves violence, which is a sort of not a real life violence. It's to one extreme, you have the kung fu movies of Hong Kong of the 60s and 70s, which has this choreographed violence, extreme violence in many ways. But you get to understand that this is fiction quite early on. I use that fictionalized violence in my books, but of course, in one of my books, it was The Phantom. I was criticized for overdoing the violence, and I remember having a look at that, and I realized that in that novel, I'd gone too far. I had crossed the line from, the stylized violence into an area where there were unnecessary violence. The violence was needed to tell the story. And so there is, of course, also a point where you, as a writer, where you may be carried away with what you think is your ability to describe violence and torture and cruelty. And I don't think it's necessarily the job of a crime writer to describe that. But on the other hand, I do think that violence is a natural part of storytelling in crime stories, not only in crime stories, but in stories in general. I think that violence is it's a big problem in our society. There was last year, or maybe even still, I was in the UK, and there were at the time criticism against crime writers for violence against women in crime stories, and to a certain point, I can see the point that they felt that women would be described as helpless victims of violence. On the other hand, it's a problem in society, that violence against women. So I said that, I would be more worried if crime novels were to hide the fact that there's a huge amount of violence against women being defenseless victims.
So the cozy mysteries, the countryside mysteries, they are not really for you. You are not going to write anything like this.
Well, I could. It's not like I'm not going to write that. And I guess that some of my short stories actually here in the Jealousy Man, they are closer to Agatha Christie crime novel than to the Harry Hole novels. But there are both kinds, I guess.
Well, and you have written several children's books, I'm glad to say, which is a bit unusual while talking about your writings. Why did you write these books about Mad Professor?
Well, it was my daughter who it was one summer when she wanted me to tell stories. I've always been telling her stories, and I was like a private jukebox that she would just say, "Okay, Daddy, tell me a story," and she would give me the ingredients she wanted in the story. And for this particular story, she wanted the Mad Professor and a cute girl that looked a little like herself, and a boy. And she was a bit afraid of boys at the time, so she wanted the boy to be smaller than the girl, and she wanted for some reason a potato in the story. I don't know what happened to the potato, but anyway, so I came up with this story, and I asked her if we could have fart powder in the story. I thought it was yes. And she wasn't so sure about that, but I insisted. And in the end, she said, okay, then we can have a little fart powder in the story. So I came up with this story about this math professor, and I quite liked the stories, and so it became a book.
But not one, several of them.
Several, five actually by now.
Yeah. So, getting back to the crime stories. We are speaking about violence, that there is lots of violence in crime stories. There is lots of violence in reality. What do you say? There is this idea that crime stories are best to describe some new things, some worrying things in reality, in society, to solve some problems and to find some questions that are just appearing in front of people, and help. The crime stories are the first ones to define the problem, some society's problem. Sorry, I'm not expressing myself at all well, but something like that. So basically, if you want to speak about society, it's best to write crime story than to write a book in another genre. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think that I'm not sure why it is that crime stories has sort of gotten the mandate of putting the floodlight on problems in society. But I think it may simply have to do with tradition, that especially in Scandinavia, in the 70s, you had the Swedish writers Sjöwall and Wahlöö, who would sort of bring the traditional crime novel from the kiosks into the serious bookstores, because they were good writers, but also they had a political agenda, and they used the crime novel to criticize society. And I think that that inspired a lot of young writers who would go on and use the crime novel for that purpose, and then it became more or less, expected that crime writers would sort of bring up what was going on in society, while at the same time, I think that maybe the traditional literature or the fine literature became more and more focused on the individual and what was going on inside your head and in your kitchen and windowsill, and so they didn't have that broad view of society, which, if you go way back, writers like Charles Dickens and Tolstoy and all the great writers, Norwegian writers also, Bjørnstjerne and Bjørnson, and so on, their job would be sort of to write about the big questions, in society. So it was just, taken over by the crime writers, which is quite interesting. So I think to begin with, basically it's not like the crime story itself lends itself more to writing political literature. I think you can use any genre to do that. I think, for example, that science fiction is probably the best genre to write about politics. So if you look at novels like 1984, for example, or Brave New World, those are much more political books than most crime fiction. So I'd say science fiction. Right? If you want to write about politics and society, write science fiction.
I see. But basically, would you say that the crime writers now are following in the footsteps of Dickens? basically following the Dickens tradition, by painting the broader picture of society, not only of the individual people, but also of the forces of the society intertwined and interworking.
Yeah, well, I can't come up with a crime writer that I would say that has taken on the role of Charles Dickens, who would write, for example, Oliver Twist, which is directed at a institution in English society that must be changed. How they treat poor people and what they do to take care of children who can't take care of themselves, and a novel that eventually changed that. I can't really see crime stories doing that and having done that, but of course that doesn't mean that there aren't examples of that. But I think that it's fair to say that 90% of crime fictions are commercial books that wants to entertain and to make money for the writer and the publishing house. And then there's 10% that has a really, are using the crime novel for idealistic or political purpose that want to change the world, that still have that naive hope that the novel, any novel, can change the world. And
can it? What would you say?
Oh, I mean, if Imagine, a song of 3.5 minutes, can change the world, I'm sure a novel can change the world. I mean, Oliver Twist did change the world a little bit.
Yeah, bit by bit. About novels and the plots that change the world. Your latest books, among them Macbeth and The Kingdom, they were not the books about Harry Hole. They were different, and especially the Macbeth. I mean, everyone knows the plot of this book. Why did you decide to take this plot, and what drove you to just take the famous plot, and what did you like to express writing that?
Well, actually, it wasn't my idea. It was an English publishing house who had the idea in connection with the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare to challenge writers. Me and one more writing being the only crime writers, but challenge them to write novels based on Shakespeare's plays. And when I was asked, I said, okay, normally I only write things based on my own ideas. I don't like to get homework.
Yeah.
But I said that in this case, it's since it's Shakespeare, if I can have Macbeth, I'll do it, because Macbeth, I've always been fascinated by the play ever since I saw the movie by Roman Polanski in 1970. It was I was quite young when I saw it, but it made me get the book, because Shakespeare was never, we didn't have Shakespeare in school. We would read Ibsen, but not Shakespeare really. So I wasn't that familiar with Shakespeare. Of course, I knew him. I know Romeo and Juliet and stuff like that, but I hadn't really read Shakespeare. So I tried to read Shakespeare first in English. I think I was 14 or something like that. So I didn't, after having read 2 pages and not understanding one sentence, I finally found a Norwegian translation, and I was really fascinated with the story. I couldn't put my finger on what it was that I found so fascinating, but it was. So when I was asked and realizing that Harry is partly based on Shakespeare or on Macbeth too, I said that if I can have Macbeth, I'll write you a novel.
But of course, you know that Macbeth is considered to be a very unlucky play, and people who have something to do with it, they are usually very much, they are afraid of having some kind of misfortunes befalling them. Did you have anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I know there were lots of accidents in connection. So if you're an actor, you're not supposed to call it Macbeth, Macbeth out loud. They call it the Scottish play.
Yeah.
So it's no, that's interesting. My story is set in the 70s in like a dark city. The dark ages of the 70s. I mean, nowadays we remember the 70s like an optimistic time. At least here in the this part of the world, it's summer of love and hippies and stuff like that. But if you look back at the 70s, it was a time in the big European cities like New York. It was a time of pollution and unemployment, fear of nuclear war, and the high crime rates in the big cities. So it's set in the dark times of the 70s. So I was very inspired by doing Macbeth, so I ended up writing other stories also set in the 70s.
Yes, 70s. I think it's quite an interesting decade, and it's not as happy and as bright as we sometimes like to remember. For example, in Lithuania, of course, it was Soviet times, so it's different. Speaking about the past, actually, now we are talking online, but you have visited Lithuania. You have visited Vilnius in 2005. When we had this crime festival, which was called Vilnius Alibi, organized by the ministers of the northern countries. And there were several writers from the Scandinavian countries. You were from Norway, they were from Sweden, from Finland, from our neighboring Latvia, and so on. Do you remember anything at all about that visit to Vilnius? It was 16 years ago, so basically it's very hard to say that.
Yeah, I have to admit that over the years, especially in that time, I was traveling all the time, so it's become kind of a blur, everything. But I just remember that I had a really good time. I had a good time. I loved everything.
Good. And I remember one thing that when I was at that festival too, so we have met basically 16 years ago. I remember one thing when I was listening to you Scandinavian writers speaking about the crime writing in your own countries and speaking of your life, and I was thinking that there is a huge difference between life and crime writing in Lithuania and life and crime writing in Scandinavian countries. And now, 16 years later, I would say that there is not such a huge difference between life in our countries, but there is still a huge difference between crime writing. So we still don't have it, basically. What did you do so right that you have such magnificent crime writing? Do you know the secret?
No, I don't. I think that, like I said, the tradition of Sjöwall and Veda, that sort of made crime writing something that was perhaps more prestigious in some other countries. Like in some countries, crime fiction is considered lowbrow. I think that in Scandinavia it was because of the tradition of Sjöwall and Veda. Most of the writers, even the writers writing serious literature, they would at one time have a go at the crime novel because it was fun and it was considered, if it was good, it was considered serious literature. Doesn't mean that there's not as many bad crime novels being published in Scandinavia as anywhere else. But it's just there are so many writing crime novels that some of them are bound to be good. But I also think that one reason why it's difficult to compare is that, especially in Norway, you have the financial possibilities that you have when writing books. You are, subsidies from the government and so on, makes it you can survive. You can make a living as a writer, not only crime writer, but as a writer in Norway without selling that many books. So I think that in Norway there's around close to at least 150 writers who make a living full-time writer. If you go to France, I ask in France, which has 15 times the population and which is this country of culture, I asked there and they say no, they have maybe 50 or 60 writers. In Italy, my publishing house told me, which is one of the biggest publishing house in Italy, say they didn't have one single writer who would be a full-time writer of fiction.
Okay, so basically, to recap, it's just you need respect, care, and money for people to start writing also crime novels. Yes,
that's a good. I next time I ask that question, I will cut it down to respect and money.
Oh, good. Okay, respect and money. That's enough. Right. Another thing I was very much interested, I wanted to ask you, and I think people are also interested in, so being a writer is your, I think, fourth profession. So at first you were kind of a professional football player. You started as a football player, then you decided to be a financial broker. And then you decided, and then you decided to be a writer. And also you are also musician and the lead singer in your band. So are these the stages in your career, or are these the aspects of your personality?
I think that I didn't play professionally. I played. We didn't have professional soccer in Norway when I played, but my dream was because I played in the Norwegian equivalent of the Premier League for a very short time before I was injured at the age of 19. But my dream was to be a professional soccer player, and in many ways, the rest of my life has been an anticlimax since I didn't become a soccer player. I had to come up with something else. So it's
so these are all displacement activities, basically.
Yeah, it's compensating for what I didn't get at the age of 19. Yeah. Elton John was asked whether he would switch his singing career for playing one cup final at Wembley, and he said, "Easy question." Of course,
he would.
I don't know if he meant it, but that was his answer. But I guess what I've always been doing is I've been a storyteller. I think that is that's the only thing I feel I'm good at. That's the only thing that, if somebody told me I'm not good at singing, or I'm not good at playing guitar, or I'm not good at being a stockbroker, I would believe them. If enough people told me that, I would say, okay, they're probably right. If the whole world told me I can't tell a story, then I would think that, okay, the whole world needs to mature and realize that I'm a great storyteller.
So, which means this is a very happy news to us. Which means that you are going to continue to tell stories.
I am, yeah.
And hopefully, Harry will come back after this a long pause. Do you think?
Yeah, I have some plans for a new Harry book. Probably will be published in a couple of years. Yeah.
Okay. So Thank you very much.